This bird could be a completely new and exotic species, unique in its kind and completely different, but it was about to die. If they didn't save it, the researchers might lose a unique specimen. But what they finally discovered was something no one could believe. But it was the most obvious thing. It all begins on an ordinary day in Buckinghamshire, which at the moment was cloudy with quite a bit of wind. It was one of those mild days, and the two travellers were exploring the region, enjoying the scenery of rolling hills and small towns with centuries of history. It wasn't the first time they'd travelled these routes. They'd often taken the A41, a road that wound through picturesque towns, perfect for peaceful drives. But this morning they had passed through Aylesbury, where they did some shopping and explored the town centre, enjoying the charm of its cobbled streets. Their final destination was Hemel Hempstead, but on the way they decided to make a slight detour to visit a small cafe recommended by a friend on the outskirts of Aston Clinton. Not only was the route relaxing, but the soft music playing on the radio made them want to enjoy a pleasant afternoon with something nice to drink. As they drove along a less travelled stretch of road at a moderate speed, they noticed something that made them stop. Something had fallen from the sky and hit the ground in front of them. This made them panic, as it could have been anything. They got out and decided to approach and noticed that it was something moving. It was a bird, but not like any they had ever seen before. Its bright plumage was orange, almost unreal, as if it were a bird from a cartoon, painted in oil, almost as if it had been hand-painted. Its wings were dishevelled and one side appeared injured. Its breathing was laboured and irregular, as if it had been poisoned or attacked, but it remained conscious and looked around with alert eyes. It was a desperate moment, and they tried to grab the little bird, looking for something to carry it on without causing more damage. But at the same time, they were afraid to touch it. Maybe it was best to leave it there. After all, it was just a bird. They could look away. They considered going back to the car and ignoring what had happened, but when they got in, they couldn't start the engine. It was clear they had a heavy conscience, so they grabbed a blanket from the back, got out, and carefully wrapped the bird in the light blanket they had in the car. They looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. The best option seemed to be to go to a nearby vet. It clearly looked like the best choice, so they used the GPS to find a clinic in the area, and in a few minutes they arrived at a small office. They quickly explained the situation, but after a quick examination, the vet explained that they couldn't identify the species. Since it was possibly a rare wild bird, they recommended seeking specialised help as they didn't have the resources to deal with something out of the ordinary. The only viable option was to take it to Tiggy Winkle's Wildlife Hospital, a wildlife rehabilitation centre in the same region. Without wasting much time, they returned to the car, the bird still wrapped in the blanket, its breathing still too weak. But they could get everything they needed at Tiggy Winkle's Wildlife Hospital, also known as the Wildlife Hospital Trust. It was founded in 1983 by Les Stocker in Haddenham, Buckinghamshire, UK, to provide care and rehabilitation for the region's wildlife. Over the years, the hospital has become a renowned facility, welcoming thousands of injured and sick animals. After Les passed away in 2016, his son, Colin Stocker, took over as director, leading the team in both healing and research, as well as promoting new advancements for the various species in the area. When the two travellers arrived at the hospital, with the bird still carefully wrapped in the blanket, they were greeted by a team of experienced animal health professionals. Soon, the veterinarians were able to identify several injuries on the bird that were the result of a fall from a great height, as well as a slight concern about its strange breathing, as it could be something beyond the injuries. They placed the small animal under a strong artificial light for proper treatment, and immediately the veterinarians began the stabilization process, taking the necessary first steps to perform a basic analysis of the bird's injuries and overall health. The initial assessment of the injuries included some ideas, as there could be signs of infection, as it showed some symptoms commonly associated with infection, such as redness, swelling, warmth in the affected area, or any purulent discharge, which could indicate a deep infection. However, it could just be the injuries and trauma that caused these symptoms, So they began the process of treating the wounds to prevent the bird from bleeding to death. They cleaned the wounds with a sterile saline solution to remove any dirt or debris that might have been left in the affected area. With great care, the area was disinfected with a mild disinfectant such as diluted iodine, which helped prevent any possible infection. Despite the injuries, the bird seemed to show signs of resilience. Its heart was beating regularly and its eyes remained alert. As the veterinarians continued the treatment, one of the hospital staff who had been watching the bird from the beginning began asking questions because something about it seemed unusual. While the rest of his colleagues tended to the small animal, and after making sure there were enough people around, he decided to check a few things out. He had lived in the area for years and knew that the bird in front of him was not part of his usual ecosystem. Although the bird appeared to be a type of seagull, its plumage was completely different, and no one had ever seen a seagull with such a bright and warm color. Intrigued by its strange appearance, he decided to inform some colleagues and check records while contacting local researchers and ornithologists to inform them about the specimen. So, among the available researchers and some on the phone, they began to ask some interesting questions to start the investigation. They seemed simple at first, but at the same time they seemed to pose quite a mystery. What had caused the bird to fall? Was it some unknown genetic mutation? Could pollution or a cooking accident have altered its biology? The possibilities multiplied, and as the conversations continued, the doubts grew. Meanwhile, the researchers began to develop hypotheses, contacting universities and ornithology experts to analyze the feather samples and other biological components. The first theory began to take shape. The first theory proposed was a genetic mutation that altered the bird's feather color, since the pigments that typically give color to bird feathers are mainly melanins and carotenoids. Any change in the distribution or synthesis of these pigments could result in color variations, such as the striking orange plumage. So, a mutation that could affect the synthesis of carotenoids could be responsible for the bird's unusual coloration, just as it is in species like the cockatiel, which often show color variations due to genetic mutations. But experts also considered other possibilities. One of the theories was that the bird could have genetic mutations, which was a strong possibility they couldn't rule out. This could be caused by the environment or even interactions with local bird species. In countries like Mexico, for example, birds with abnormal colors have been reported due to factors like leucism, a genetic disorder that produces white coloration instead of the normal colors. But in this case, the bright orange color of the bird didn't fit with these phenomena. The third theory that emerged was that of adaptive evolution, and this was the one they liked best. If this were the case, they might be looking at a genetic change for survival. It was speculated that yellow or orange coloration in birds might have evolutionary advantages, such as better camouflage in certain habitats or improved chances of reproduction. If this were true, the bright color could be a natural adaptation to the environment in which the bird had fallen. But while it sounded intriguing, nothing in the natural history of gulls suggested such a trait. But there was one fact. Nothing they did would matter if this specimen died, so the priority was to keep it alive at all costs. But did it really have a chance of surviving if its body was still in intensive care, while these men were merely speculating theories in the comfort of their own homes? It was clear that the real heroes were working right there, and that was what mattered. Whatever the reason, it was a living creature that had landed injured on the ground, and the doctors at Tiggywinkle's Wildlife Hospital continued to treat the gull, working meticulously to stabilize it. The wounds were disinfected with mild antiseptics to prevent any possible infection, and since the bleeding was minor, they were able to control it with some sterile gauze and direct pressure until the bleeding stopped. Thanks to this, the next step was to cover the wounds with a sterile dressing to protect them from external contaminants. Everything seemed to be calming down, but there was one thing that hadn't stopped. The bird was still struggling to breathe, and worse, now it was barely breathing at all. The veterinarians, obviously even more alarmed, realized it could be something worse, So they had to run additional tests as quickly as possible to see if there was any internal damage or if the bird was being poisoned by some substance. Following the standard procedure for identifying poisonings, they began looking for the classic symptoms: lethargy, difficulty breathing, and strange behaviour. To go deeper into the diagnosis, the doctors decided to bathe the bird in warm water, believing that this might help determine if an external substance was affecting its health. As the days passed, something happened that no doctor would have expected. Through conversations and phone calls with other universities, the researchers mentioned it, and word began to spread. It was only a matter of days before social media and local media amplified the rumours. Was this bird a rare species, or just an isolated case of accidental contamination? Speculation was everywhere, and growing by the day, for some reason, the curiosity continued to grow as the community became more and more intrigued, and many wondered about the bird's future. But what happened to the bird? The answer is simple. The researchers analysing the case decided to go to the scene, as their priority was clearly to help. When they learned that the seagull had been poisoned, they decided to offer their expertise to avoid any mistakes. They knew that in addition to treating the poisoning, the medical team had to consider all possibilities, even the unlikely ones. And it was then, while bathing the bird, that something surprising happened. When they wet the seagull's feathers, it became clear that this wasn't an unknown species, but a common seagull whose feathers had been painted with curry and paint. It was obvious that the bright orange colour was actually the result of the paint sticking to its feathers. The doctors were stunned. Although it was a ridiculous situation and anyone else might have found it amusing, they kept their laughter to themselves as they focused on treating the bird. So veterinarians and researchers stepped in because the bird had been poisoned by the paint itself, making it clear that the damage wasn't from a toxin, but from the paint that had been ingested or absorbed through the bird's skin. So with all that, they began the detoxification process. Everyone, including the researchers, who, in their altruistic act, no longer cared about the research, the priority now was to help the bird recover. The first step was to remove the source of the poison. The bird was removed from the contaminated area, and with great care, they began to remove the paint residue from its feathers with warm water and a mild detergent, making sure it didn't ingest any more toxins. All the while, the bird received immediate veterinary care, with fluids administered to prevent dehydration and medications to alleviate the symptoms of poisoning. The researchers who joined the process provided their expertise and resources. Working hand in hand with the doctors to ensure a full recovery, treatment continued for several days, with Tiggy Winkle's professionals and toxicology experts working together to treat the gull. Of course, protocols were put in place to ensure that the environment was free from contamination. And it was recommended that safe products for birds, including those suitable for the environment, be used. The rescuers were informed of the situation and were relieved to know what had happened. In the end, despite the theories, rumours and fear, everything was resolved without any problems. When everything calmed down, the researchers laughed and shared their wild theories about it being another species. It was something to laugh about. Eventually, the seagull, named Vinny by the rescuers, began to show signs of recovery. The detoxification process was successful, and once Vinny's feathers were clean, he returned to his normal state, free from the harmful effects of the paint in his system. Soon after, they began receiving calls inquiring about the bird's condition. The veterinarians didn't understand why there was so much interest until they found out they had become a trending topic, so they went out and debunked all the rumours surrounding them. Apparently, the situation quickly became a joke due to the absurd amount of information being spread. They also informed the public that the bird would be released once it was fully recovered, and little Vinny would be back in the skies sooner than later. And that concludes the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, but it's important to remember that sometimes animals need help too.